Hello, Jeando.
Hello, Kevin.
So F.M. Alexander's work later became known as the Alexander technique. So can you talk a bit about what the word technique means in this context? Did he ever even use the word technique for his work? And what is the difference between how you would see a technique and how the word is used or not used in the modern Alexander technique?
Yes, it's a very good question. Many people, teachers of the modern Alexander technique, do not really like the word technique. Some have said, I've heard some teachers say that even Alexander never used the word technique. So it's good to be very clear about this. Of course, we teach something we call the Alexander technique. Well, in our case, because we want to make a stark difference with the modern somatic approach, we say we teach the initial, but it's still Alexander technique. And I want to explain why I continue to use the word technique. Well, first of all, because these ideas that Alexander never used the word technique is I can't understand it really. It's so funny to hear something like that. It's not the case. So let's go back to as always we are doing here is we want to see what Alexander is saying, and what he's saying is that the consideration of principles in connection with any plan of education leads naturally to the consideration of the technique, the means whereby these principles are to be carried out. And in the pages of his book, we are concerned with the technique to be employed in putting the principle I've outlined to practical use in the work of reeducation, coordination, and readjustment on a conscious plane. Well, so this first is to stop the quibbling. It's absolutely obvious that Alexander understood the term technique. He used it properly, and it's also clear that for him, a technique was necessary, and the technique was necessary to put principles into practical use. He even says that these principles he invented. Yeah. He says, I have outlined principles. Well, he invented some principles, and in order for this principle to be carried out in practice, there was a need of a technique. And this text is the second book. It's 1924. It's not something forgotten. It's in the plain text. So thinking that the technique is a somatic technique, that we are going towards something that is natural, makes no sense if you read Alexander. In the Alexander technique, there are principles, and principles are not somatic perception, somatic experiences. You can't experience a principle. You can reason out a principle. You can understand and relate a principle in a system, but you cannot feel a principle. This is clear. So we are clearly discussing something of the mind. A principle is constructed with speech and understanding and intelligence. It has nothing to do with the feeling sense, really. So I understand that my colleagues of the somatic branch do not like the word technique, but for us, it is a fundamental to understand that we are dealing with experiments, with applied procedures. But these applied procedures are, in fact, carrying out principles, carrying out. So maybe it's necessary for some people to have a better idea of what principle a principle could be. If you want a very soft explanation, you can start with a principle is a very general rule of action. It's we are really dealing here with always this this idea of translating ideas, theories into acts, into action. And so a rule of action is going to help you organize your behavior so that instead of repeating the old pattern, the old habits that you may have, you start to explore a new way of organizing the movements of the different parts of your organism. This is the basis of our work. Does it sound simple and clear? Is
Yes.
yeah,
Go ahead.
It's a very broad representation and explanation, but it sounds clear. So if this is fine, it's now necessary to investigate further into what Alexander is exactly saying. So when we consider this sentence, there are principles. And so the first thing you want to discover in the books is what are the principles. You know, there is, of course, the principles that are very common that most people will remember, and they are the most difficult to understand. Psychophysical unity is one. So very often we start with principles that are easier to discover, like, for example, the means whereby principle. So we have means whereby the principles are going to be carried out, and these are procedures. We use procedures in the Alexander technique to, in fact, demonstrate that a student can use instructions in order to organize the movements of different parts of the organism. And so this is based on a very broad definition that Alexander has given you. It's like a basis of our work. If we understand the means whereby principles on which the teacher who adheres to the idea of unity in the working of the human organism will base his teaching method, we must recognize that the attainment of any desired end or the performance of any act, such as making a golf stroke, involves the directions and performance of a connected series of preliminary acts by means of the mechanism of the organism. And that therefore, if the use of the mechanisms is to be directed so as to result in the satisfactory attainment of the desired end, the direction for this use must be projected in a connected series to correspond with the intended connected series of preliminary acts. So this is the basis of the work. This is how we start, and this is how we finish, is that we have this idea of the unity in the working of the human organism. The unity we are seeking is the unity between the mental and the physical. In the mental, we can start to understand a mechanism, understand that a mechanism is a system of parts that are concerted to produce a certain function. So it's very, very important to understand that at first, most people do not have an understanding of mechanisms. They perform acts. They don't even realize that they are giving themselves orders to move. They will tell you, when I move my hand, my elbow just followed. Of course, it can be demonstrated by just asking the same student to consciously direct the elbows by using orders, that a new trajectory can be found for the elbow in the same reaching movement. Therefore, Alexander imagined that the person was giving herself subconscious orders. The person was ordering the pass of the elbow without understanding she was doing so, without realizing she was doing so, without feeling she was doing so. But once you can make this order conscious, you will find that yes, you can direct that movement of a part inside the mechanism of the arm. And the relationship between the mental and the physical is strengthened when the pupil starts to understand that he can command, he can consciously guide and control the movements of any part of the mechanism as soon as he starts to understand how the mechanism is working. Because there is a problem with the somatic system, is that in the somatic system, even if the teacher is moving the parts of the person in the correct manner, this is not giving the pupil an understanding of the mechanism. Not at all. I had a lesson recently with a new student, a new teacher. She came to have a lesson with me after, I don't know, giving 35 years of Alexander technique teaching. And her comment, she sent me a comment by email. Her comment is really interesting. Here it is. So I'm going to share my screen again. And this is the comment. She said, I found my lesson fascinating. I had known that I overarched my back, but didn't know the mechanisms involved, and therefore didn't know how to undo that. Well, this clearly indicates that in the somatic training, well, there is no need of principles. They don't go by principles. She said that she didn't know the mechanism. Yes. But as she discovered the mechanism, she discovered that she could give herself orders to, in fact, modify the movements of the different parts of the mechanism in such a way that the back was not overarched anymore. So this is what we call learning. Having somebody move the parts of her torso time and time again did not, well, concede to having the understanding of the mechanism, and therefrom, from the understanding, the capacity to direct the new movements that would lead to a different end. So what has changed is that now, with this lesson of conscious guidance and control, she understands the mechanism we are dealing with. She understands what makes the wrong coordination appears, a physical coordination appear on screen, and she knows how to anticipate, because she knows that if she doesn't give herself orders, she will simply, without realizing it, repeat the old habit. The new organization of the paths only appears when she gives herself orders. And this will be so for quite some time, for the next 10 years to come, because it takes a very, very long time for a somatic repetition of new movements to really cement into a very strong and repetitive habit. Not that we are very interested in repetitive habits, but it's absolutely clear that gaining the control of these movements is fundamental. It's a first step. There are other parts of the general organism that are working, of course, all together, and in our case, have to be re-educated. But this is the start. This is the start to understand that it's possible to coordinate the mental activity with a definite physical activities that can be, in fact, controlled, measured on a video recording of her movements, so that after gaining that guidance and control, she can, well, by herself, generate the correct orders and then check on a video recording whether she's properly coordinating the movements that we want to see appear, the movement intended, with the correct instructions. So this is our view of technicalities, our view of the technique to translate principles into practice, into actual practice. And this is very different from the modern somatic idea. The modern somatic idea has a model also, but it's a completely different model. I found it recently on social media, where Alexander teachers are posting ideas or posting interesting sentences. And they are, I was following this presentation of writers of that talks about the Alexander technique, and there was a comment. I was attracted to it, and there was this lady teacher. I think she's a young teacher of the modern Alexander technique, and she said she was commenting on a book by a somatic teacher that is an English somatic teacher that is well known. That is Peter Nobes. He's written a book that is called Mindfulness in 3D. It's clearly on the extreme fringe of the somatic technique. And what the lady was saying is that my favorite quote in the book is when Peter Nobes, says that what children have and the adults have lost. And here is the quote: "It is something light, balanced, lively, lithe, buoyant, effortless, movable, energetic, flexible, fluid, graceful." So the idea is that the somatic approach, I have a difficulty to say technique, because I don't see where they translate our principles into action, and certainly not Alexander's principles, that's for sure, is to, in fact, bring back to the adult, is the customer that can pay for lessons, bring back to the customers, the adult, that fantastic list of adjectives: light, balanced, lively, buoyant, effortless, movable, energetic, flexible, fluid, graceful, that Mr. Nobes has seen in very young children. Well, the question is, Alexander never saw that idea as true. He puts forward that more and more children are discoordinated, and what is not coordinated is the connection between the reasoning mind and the actual physical actions. And so this is strange. Under the same Alexander technique name, you have now a completely different approach. Some approaches that are clearly somatic, and that want to go back to some fantastic era when you were a child. So this has absolutely nothing to do with this idea that the performance of any act involves the direction and perform of a connected series of preliminary acts. It's as if the child knows how to direct and perform a connected series of preliminary acts. This is absolutely ludicrous. If you ask a child to change one of the movement he's doing in order to, I don't know, to stand, for example, well, you will find that the child will look at you with absolute incomprehension. The child has no way to analyze the different movement he's making in order to perform any action. No way. So coming back to the lady that was claiming that her first session was fascinating, that he discovered a mechanism. I thought about it and I say, well, yes, let's compare Alexander's work with the child. And so I came up with this comparison that you will see makes things very, very obvious. I understand it's a bit gross, but it's always good to make a point to go toward extremes. That's what I think. So we have two different pictures on screen, and of course you can see that there is a child. So we are going to investigate and see how buoyant and free the child is all the time. And we can see what Alexander is striving for during his lesson with the young Irishman in 1951. That is a very elderly Alexander. Is on this picture, you can just see his head. He's 81 years of age. We are not talking about the young Alexander here, but the old one. So I mentioned this somatic teacher that had her first lesson and she was overarching her back. And I pointed to her that there is a rib cage inside the torso. It's a bony structure that has a certain compliance, but you must understand that being made of bones, there are certain things you can't do with a rib cage. So you can be certain to see ribs somewhere, and when, for example, we can see the hands, Alexander's hands. With my cursor, I'm pointing to his hands, and we can see that he's striving during the whole lesson to organize the movement of the middle and upper torso. And we can see what he's trying to do. He's trying to make sure that the upper torso is forward and that the middle torso has a tendency to go back to, in fact, implement this kind of standing form. And in this standing form, we can see that there is a hump that is made sure to get a very large space for the thoracic curve in the spine. And you can see that the head is very far forward of the back, in such a way that you can see that the face is forward of the part of the torso that is the front of the person. When you look at the child next to it, you see a completely different image, of course. Yes. And you see a few details that Alexander keeps pointing to. He keeps pointing to the incorrect poise of the chest, where the upper part of the front of the chest is unduly lifted. The undue lifting of the front part of the chest is very clear here. You could imagine that the sternum bone of that child is pulled backward at the top very much. While what Alexander is striving for is obviously to get a vertical tie at the front. And the vertical tie at the front will make sure that there is, and that is Alexander saying, he says that he found that the unduly lifted front part of the chest was associated with a shortened back. And so, of course, we see it. We see that the lower ribs, the lower part of the rib cage, are really pushing forward. So we are looking at a rotation of the rib cage. The child is giving consent to two movements, one movement of the upper part of the chest that is going back in space, one movement of the lower ribs that are going forward in space. Yes? And this leads, of course, with the protruding ribs to what Alexander called a protruding abdomen. So the child may be buoyant and all you want, but in fact, the child is using somatic orders of movements, and the results are appalling, isn't it? Of course, the child may be a fantastic little person. This has nothing to do with it. We are discussing here the coordination between a representation. So it's absolutely obvious that that child has no intellectual representation of is movements of the different movements is applying at the same time. You have to move the lower ribs forward. You have to move the upper torso back. You have to move the hips too far forward. You have to shorten the back by having the pelvis rotated forward and down at the front. Yes, but you cannot ask a pupil what you can ask an adult, because the difference between the two is the mastery of language, and the mastery of language in the sense of a technique, in the sense of understanding mechanisms, in the sense of having an idea of the mechanical principles we are dealing with. It's absolutely obvious that the child here is shortening the back, and so the spring tissue that are in the back, because they are shortened, are not participating. When a spring is too short, the spring has no mechanical resistance. So the child cannot use the antagonistic pulls. He must use, well, his crude coordination. So this is a step in the process. Yes, it's just a phase. And the next phase is starting to use intelligence, the conscious mind, the reasoning mind, the mind that uses language and technical aspects. So, for example, geometry. We can see here that the geometry is completely changed. Of course, on this image, Alexander is performing the movement for the gentleman. And this is unfortunate in my mind, because this does not ensure that this gentleman understand exactly what principle Alexander is putting into action. As he said, his technique is for. So when you observe, so this is an image that I use very often, because this is prior to Alexander. This is an image taken on the right, taken from a book written in 1882. And I have added a few details so that people can understand what I'm talking about. We see these Del Sartre teachers of gestural movements were requesting their pupil to have one foot back, very close to the chair before going to sit. Alexander himself talks about it in Man's Supreme Inheritance, and the very famous teacher Patrick MacDonald also requested his pupil to have a 1 foot back. Though when I looked at the image, I discovered that the writer of the book was not the draftsman, was not drawing the images, because the image that we see does not correspond to the text exactly, because on the text it said that the torso is supported by the in leg, by the leg at the back, the soft, and obviously we see a series of defaults. We see that the rib cage is unduly lifted at the front. Again, the faulty poise of the chest is seen exactly as in the young child. And we see that also the pelvis is rotated unduly forward at the front. As a result, both movements lead to having the weight more on the front foot than on the back. Alexander said also in Man's Supreme Inheritance that the foot should be on the in leg. We see all the coordination defects, so the physical coordination defects, which is that the back is shortened, the abdomen is protruding. So I had the idea to, in fact, use verbal instructions, considering the different mechanisms, and starting to imagine what could be new verbal orders to readjust the mechanisms in activity. I was starting to use a technique to translate the principle into action. There is the principle of the means whereby any movement, like standing with one leg backward, touching a chair, that movement involved, of course, the direction and performance of a connected series of preliminary acts. What are these preliminary acts? Well, here, simply, we want to see that when the person is going back with one leg, one foot, we want to see that instead of leading with the upper torso going back and the buttocks, we want the person to be leading with the back, with the middle part of the torso. We are going to ask the person who has a habit of having an unduly lifted torso with lower ribs very far forward. And that's what I asked the teacher that was fascinated by our first session. I said to her, consider that object that we call rib cage. Consider that this rib cage object can be rotated deliberately. How many movements would you need to give yourself in order to rotate the rib cage deliberately? After some help and some time and some reasoning, she found that yes, it was absolutely necessary to have two opposite movements. That it was necessary, of course, to pull the lower ribs back in space. But we found in her case that when she pulled the lower rib cage back in space, she had a tendency to pull the upper rib cage back in space at the same speed, which in fact, instead of rotating the rib cage into the new coordination, was in fact well, creating exactly the translation, the same problem. She had a rotated rib cage at the front, and she had, before starting the movement of readjustment, and she had the rotated rib cage in the wrong way after. So she discovered that yes, she needed two movements. She needed to order the upper part of the torso in a certain direction. And there we found that the new direction, so I used these diagrams and I showed her that if we were to choose a center of rotation for that motion of the rib cage object at the front, so we took a very notable anatomical landmark at the bottom of the sternum. And I said to her, don't you think it could be possible to rotate the rib cage object at the lower part of the sternum point? Because in that way, if it was possible to move the upper part forward and the lower part of the object backward, you would find that, of course, the lower part rotating around that spot would go back and up. It would be lifting the lower ribs back, going back faster, but at the same time, it would promote a movement of the upper part of the chest that she, in her case, was unduly overarched, as she said. It would promote a movement of that upper rib cage forward and up, instead of going backward and down. And I said this can be used as a system to control the execution of the movement, because your habit is different. Your habit is such that you have a tendency to rotate the rib cage with a center of rotation that is at the back of the rib cage. And if you rotate with the two new orders, your rib cage, around the old center of rotation. That is the conception, the subconscious or somatic conception, the embodied cognition that she had about the rotation of the rib cage object in space. Well, we should see a different result. If you continue with the center of rotation that is at the back, we will find that with the center of rotation at your back, when you pull the back and the upper chest forward, what we are going to see on screen is the upper chest going forward and down. Because if the center of rotation of the object is at the back, well, you are just going to reverse the movement the person is doing. There is no change of conception, really. You have of course, two movements that are opposite to the one you were doing before, but the change of conception has not happened. And so, as a result, you're not going to be seen to go forward and up with the upper chest. You're going to be seen forward and going forward and down. And even it's very possible that your habit of rotation of the rib cage is going to be shown, because you cannot, and that's what she was doing when she started to think of this movement of rotation of the rib cage. She could not imagine moving the rib cage without dropping her nose and chin down, which obviously was indicating a center of rotation of the rib cage rotation at the back, where the spine is. Well, it's a simple demonstration where the person could start to think, okay, I can use my mind. I can start to reason. This idea of rules of action that I call principles is real. It's not just something that is written in the books. It's something that is real. No way. I was trying to get the sun off my lens, but no way. There is too much sun at the moment. I'm sorry. So we are not dealing with a technique that tries to bring you back to your infant coordination. Certainly not. This is all about using intelligence to develop a new coordination, not going back toward some ideal natural or coordination. There is no ideal natural coordination. It's a myth. It's a true myth that children have a great coordination. Just look around. I had 6 children. I had time to see, and my children are fantastic. But when they were children, their coordination was appalling. Of course. Well, it was, of course, it was. They were nice person to be with. They were fantastic. They were full of new things all the time, new discoveries and happiness and everything you want children to be. But if you were to take a technical look at their coordination, it was clear that they were doing everything wrong. Everything wrong. What I mean by that is that the seeds of the wrong coordination we see in every people was there. I'm not saying that they were end gainers or anything like that, and they would not change. I'm just saying that this concept that the children have a fantastic coordination is not true to facts. Absolutely not. And this opens something that is really clearly an opening. By that I mean that there is something to discover. There is a reason coordination that is a joy. The joy is not to go back to when you were a child, to subconscious performance. No, there is joy in the intellectual discovery of the mechanisms and how you can, in fact, expand your coordination by following intellectual, very dry, very technical reasonings. These very technical reasoning are just necessary to coordinate the movement in a new way, but they are not the end of it. There is also the performance of new. We discussed last time this idea of sitting. Sitting for long commitments. You want to write a book, you want to study. At the moment, I will tell you, it's very simple. I am sitting all day. It's very simple. Half of my day I write, half of the day I teach online. I'm sitting all day, and it's a joy. I have a very sturdy chair, that is very narrow. I cannot sit back. I'm very far from the back, and I enjoy it. It's great. Yes, you don't need to perform something childish. You don't need to be full of feelings in order to be really alert, really expanding your mind doesn't go toward the subconscious side. On the contrary, I really think that the technique is a really fantastic freeing system, freeing mechanism. It's not just technique dry system. No, it's how you discover that you can interact with your intelligence, with your behavior. That's all. Any comment?
Yes. This idea that children have, or that everyone as children had perfect coordination, and that somehow we lose it when we become adults, seems to be part of a bigger worldview or belief that people in the somatic world tend to have, which is that there was some sort of distant past where all people, and there was a kind of lost paradise that civilization has, we've lost it due to civilization, and that we need to get back to when everything was good. So it would automatically flow from that we would be born with it as children before we meet this nasty world that puts us wrong. So that's the belief.
Yeah.
Whereas what really it is, it's more, rather than being a lost paradise that we have to get back to, it's more that we're a work in progress and we just haven't finished learning. We're unfinished learners as children. If you're going to do reasoned movements, it stands to reason that you need to wait until you've developed the parts of your brain and mind that's able to reason. So exactly. By definition, the child wouldn't have perfect coordination because it's not able to have reasoned coordination yet, which is completely normal. But then if you have adults that are looking back trying to copy the child, then we're not taking responsibility for our own evolution, if you want to put it in those terms.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, it's always surprising that this myth of the natural child has crept back into the technique, because it's exactly against this idea of conscious guidance and control. So Alexander is talking about readjustments. He's talking about using intelligence. And suddenly we are brought back to this idea that touch is fantastic, that touch is the ultimate teaching tool for teaching movements. There are teachers, they really believe that movements are beyond intellectual reach, that the coordination of the human being is happening in the brain somewhere. It must be concern with altering tonic activity that is absolutely subconscious, that you can't even imagine how many thousands of impulses there are in the brain. It's completely beyond us. No, we discussed something that is really practical. The practical aspect is that there are a series of movements that are performed by the person that is rotating the rib cage, and we want the person, first of all, to realize that she's performing these acts, she's giving consent to these movements, because the person at first says, no, I'm not doing anything with my rib cage. So I had the teacher stand. I say, well, you're sitting, could you stand, please? And at the finishing moment, I said to her, look at the wall in front of you. You understand, I'm situated, I'm looking at you from the side, yes? So I see the front of your chest and I see the wall in front of you. Could you tell me, looking at the wall in front of you, what is the result of the movement you've made with the rib cage? You understand, you have made movement with the rib cage in standing, going from sitting to standing. First, you had to incline the torso forward and then you stood. Yes, so your rib cage has moved. Is that correct? Yes. And am I right in saying that you, in fact, commanded these movements? You've ordered the movement of the rib cage. Well, not very consciously, but you've ordered them. Okay? So now the rib cage is in a certain position. You have assumed a certain position because of these movements. And so I said to the person, so now, look, can you represent what it is I see? I am the teacher. I'm looking at you from the side. There is the wall in front of you. What is the part of the sternum that is closest to the wall? Is it the upper part of the sternum or is it the lower part of the sternum? Her answer was quite quick and abrupt. Well, it's very clear. The top part of the sternum is closer to the wall than the bottom of the sternum. And so I said to her, so are you telling me that the top part of your sternum is in front of the lower part of the sternum in your case? And she said, definitely. It is not what I was seeing. I was seeing the complete opposite. So there was a choice, either believe what she felt or believe what I saw. And in conscious guidance and control, there is a rule. It's an absolute principle. You believe what you see. Yes? If you see that a person has finished the movement with the upper chest away from the wall, further away from the wall than the lower part of the sternum, you can tell that person that she's unduly lifting the front part of the chest. And she must know it. I cannot shy from telling her the truth that I see. So then, in order for her because her feeling, and I asked her to look down and look at the parts. And even when looking down, she was continuing with the same answer. She was saying, no, 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 I have the upper part of the chest further forward than the lower part of the chest. That was absolutely amazing. And so I ended up with using a ruler, a stick, a piece of wood. And I said to her, can you hold a piece of wood as a sword? And she said, well, yeah. And she took the sword. And I said, where is the tip? And she said, the tip is here, which is correct. It was the end of the ruler. I said, could you hold the tip of the sword between the thumb and index finger of the opposite hand? And she said, yes, I can. I said, fine. I said, now, would it be possible for you to bring the tip of the sword on the top of the sternum bone and the blade? You understand what I mean by blade? We never discussed sword before, but she understood blade because blade is part of the system of representation. We have a sword like tip, like handle. So she knew how to create the movement, and immediately she could represent the system that made the instruction have sense for her. So she had the tip of the sword in between the index and thumb, and I had her place it on the top of the sternum and the blade on the body of the mesosternum. And I said to her, tell me how the sword is orientated. Is it not really orientated back and up at the tip extremity? And she said, yes, it is. I said, do you realize that this is the exact opposite answer to the three answers you've given me before according to your feeling sense? This lady is a somatic teacher. The somatic teaching is based on the idea that if you are made to feel the correct movement, you're going to represent the correct movement in your head. Well, it's absolutely clear that in that case she was fooled by sensory appreciation, but she was fooled also, or she could not trust the somatic sense. And so she realized with the help of the tool suddenly that yes, during the gesture, that is from going to sitting to standing, she was generating movement so that the speed of the upper chest was much faster than the speed of the lower chest. As a result, she was overarching her back because of her own orders. And so this is completely different. And you would not be able to teach that to a 2-year-old, or the one we've seen on the picture is not capable of understanding these ideas. And so because the teacher was capable of understanding these ideas, she was able to change the rotation of the rib cage nearly instantly. In the somatic process, there is always this idea that you have to repeat. You have to repeat an action time and time again until it becomes a habit. In the conscious guidance and control system, it's completely different, really. It's the opposite. It's that once you understand the mechanism, when you understand that the movements of the different parts are making the posture, are making the the coordination assume the position, it becomes possible to alter that coordination in that mechanism. That doesn't mean that the person was suddenly able to coordinate all the different movements of the mechanism of the torso, of the mechanism of the arm, of the mechanism of the leg together. Certainly not. It was a step in the process, but a very important step on a theoretical basis, because then she understood what conscious guidance and control meant. That's it. That's my take on the technique.
And the use of the video will have helped, probably led to her being so fascinated with the lesson, because she can watch on the video after and see that what she felt at the time was completely the opposite of what is obvious. And it's that moment of when the clash between your felt belief and the reality that you can see in the video is an aha moment for people, and is always fascinating.
Yes.
Not just when you start.
There is a wrong side to that fascination. I've seen it many times. There are many, especially when the student is a teacher, and sometimes a well-known teacher, is that very often I have people that say to me, but normally I'm much better than this. Or at that moment I'm through a difficult phase, and I'm not really good at my coordination. Normally I am. So the person said last week, a person said to me, no, but when I finished my training, I was much better than this. And so I said, yes. And so you have a video to show for it. You saw yourself on video. She said, no, I felt it. It was obvious. Okay, so you have no video. No, I didn't want to. I just explained after that I had exactly the same fascinating experience. That after finishing my training with STAT in England, like 5 years later, I was busy still giving lessons with hands, and I was giving workshops, and these workshops were filmed. And once I saw the rushes, I saw the films, and I saw myself talking about back to lengthen and widen, of head forward and up, putting hands on people, doing the show and everything. And I look at my coordination, and wow, it was such a blow. I had the distinct impression to be on top of things. I was controlling. My feelings were great. I was buoyant and strong and efficient and everything. But on screen, it was like madness. No, I can't be doing this. It can't be me. Take this video away. Crush them. Don't show them to anybody. Oh no. So yes, it's fascinating, but at first it can be a real blow. I could not stand it. And so I understand sometimes there are teachers that they don't take many lessons, that they take one or two. There are different kinds. There are people, they come and they will have, they want to understand the principles. They want to understand how the principles are put into action. And so they, like you, for example, they all dawn on the boat in the tempest, but there are others. I can already tell the first encounter with their own movements is too much. It's too far from their own imaginary representation of their coordination. It's so yes, it's fascinating, but in every sense. The fascination can be ugly.
Yeah, it's a bit of an extreme sport psychophysically.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Jeando. For everyone watching the video, you'll get a link to Jeando's website and the place you can book a lesson with him underneath. And we will see everybody in the next episode. Thank you, Jeando.
I apologize for the sun because I haven't been able, but next time I will find a way to shut, because this is south of France. You can't help it. The sun is.
Now you're just making everybody jealous.
Bye.
Okay,
thank you.
Bye bye.